The rain had just begun to fall when Daniel Carter stepped onto the front steps of Crestwood Academy. He wasn't supposed to be here, not on a Friday evening, not after everyone had gone home. But tonight wasn't about lessons in mathematics or literature. Tonight was about an invitation that had been playing in his mind for weeks. The invitation had come from Ms. Elena Marlowe, the school's most enigmatic teacher. 37, confident, with eyes that could pierce through excuses, she had a reputation for getting exactly what she wanted. Daniel had been her teaching assistant for only 2 months, but something in the way she lingered in conversations, in the way her hand brushed his arm as she passed by, told him there was more beneath the surface. He entered the empty hallway, the sound of his footsteps echoing. The classroom door at the end was slightly ajar. A warm light spilled into the corridor. His heart pounded. Inside, Ms. Marlowe stood at her desk, a glass of red wine in hand, the other hand resting casually on an open folder. She looked up when he entered, her lips curving into the kind of smile that could make a man forget his own name. "You're late," she said, though her voice carried no real reproach. Daniel cleared his throat. The buses were. "Excuses," she cut in smoothly. "One of the first lessons, Daniel, never make excuses for lateness. Own it." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit." Her tone was commanding, but not unkind. Daniel sat, trying not to stare at the way the soft fabric of her blouse hinted at the contours of her figure. She noticed, of course Ms. Marlowe always noticed. "I have a proposition for you," she began, sipping her wine. "It's unconventional. It might even make you uncomfortable at first. But if you trust me, you might find it enlightening." Daniel felt heat rise to his face. "What kind of proposition?" She leaned forward, her perfume faint but intoxicating. "You're intelligent. Eager. But you lack control over your impulses, over your confidence. I could teach you, not the things they put in textbooks, but something far more useful." Her gaze held his, steady, unyielding. "Control over yourself. Over others. The art of persuasion. The art of command." Daniel's pulse quickened. "And why me?" "Because," she said simply, "I see potential. And I like a challenge." There was a long pause before she slid a small black envelope across the desk toward him. "Saturday. 8 o'clock. My address is inside. Dress well. And, Daniel," she tilted her head slightly, "be ready to follow instructions without question." Saturday evening came faster than he'd expected. Daniel stood outside Ms. Marlowe's townhouse, the glow of street lamps casting golden halos on the wet pavement. He knocked once. The door opened to reveal her no glasses, no cardigan, just a sleek black dress and an expression that mixed amusement with authority. "Right on time," she said. "Good. Come in." The living room was warm, filled with soft music and the faint scent of sandalwood. A second glass of wine sat waiting for him on the low table. He took it, trying to hide the tremor in his hands. Ms. Marlowe sat opposite him, crossing her legs in a slow, deliberate motion. "Tonight," she said, "we'll begin with something simple. I want you to listen. Not speak, unless spoken to. Just, follow. For the next hour, Daniel found himself in a world unlike anything he had experienced. She asked him questions personal, probing, and instructed him to answer with complete honesty. She corrected the way he sat, the way he breathed. At first, he felt awkward, exposed. But the more he followed her guidance, the more he felt a strange sense of exhilaration. At one point, she moved closer, close enough that he could feel her breath against his ear. "Do you know," she murmured, "how much power there is in holding someone's attention entirely?" Daniel swallowed hard. "I think I'm starting to." She smiled. "Good. You'll need that. Especially when you meet her." "Her?" he asked, confused. Ms. Marlowe stood, walking toward a door at the far end of the room. "Not yet," she said over her shoulder. "Patience, Daniel. That's lesson 2. The following week at school was agony. Every glance from Ms. Marlowe felt charged with unspoken meaning. Every accidental brush of her hand made his thoughts race. And now there was this mysterious her to wonder about. When Saturday came again, he arrived earlier than before. She greeted him with a knowing smirk and led him to the living room, but this time, they weren't alone. Sitting on the sofa was a woman Daniel had never seen before. She was perhaps in her late 20s, her hair a cascade of dark curls, her eyes sharp and appraising. She wore a crimson dress that seemed almost too bold for the setting. "Daniel," Ms. Marlowe said, "this is Clara. She's an old friend. She's here to help with your education." Clara's smile was slow, deliberate. "So you're the one she's been talking about?" Daniel's voice caught in his throat. "Talking about? Oh, don't look so nervous," Clara said with a soft laugh. "We're not here to scare you. We're here to shape you." Ms. Marlowe poured 3 glasses of wine and handed one to each of them. "Tonight will be different. You'll have to divide your attention. Keep up, Daniel. Both of us will be watching." What followed was less a conversation and more a test. Clara and Ms. Marlowe took turns asking questions, interrupting each other, pushing Daniel to respond quickly, decisively, without hesitation. When he faltered, Ms. Marlowe's sharp gaze reminded him of the rules. When he succeeded, Clara's approving smile made his chest tighten. By the end of the night, Daniel's mind was spinning. The 2 women seemed to move in perfect sync, as if they had rehearsed this dance of dominance and challenge. And Daniel, caught between them, felt both exhausted and strangely alive. As he left, Ms. Marlowe leaned in close. "Lesson 3, she whispered. "Control is nothing without adaptability." Her hand lingered on his arm just long enough for Clara to notice. The knowing glance they exchanged made Daniel realize something. Whatever this was, he was only at the beginning. Daniel barely slept that week. Every spare thought drifted back to Saturday night, to the 2 women, their sharp questions, the unspoken coordination between them. He found himself watching Ms. Marlowe more closely in the halls, trying to spot signs of Clara's influence. Did they talk about him during the week? Did they plan the tests in advance? He also noticed something else. Ms. Marlowe's presence seemed to change him in small ways. When she passed by, he sat straighter without thinking. When she asked him a question in class, his voice was more certain. She had planted something inside him, a thread of confidence, and she was pulling it tighter each time they met. Saturday arrived with a restless energy. Daniel dressed more carefully than before, dark button-down shirt, neat trousers, no jacket. He knocked at Ms. Marlowe's townhouse door exactly at 8. Clara answered. Her smile was almost a smirk. "She's in the other room," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "But before she comes out, I have a little warm-up for you." She led him to the living room, where the soft scent of sandalwood still hung in the air. The lighting was lower this time, shadows playing in the corners. Clara sat on the sofa and patted the spot beside her. Daniel hesitated, remembering Ms. Marlowe's rules about only speaking when spoken to, but Clara wasn't Ms. Marlowe. Was she bound by the same rules? He sat. Clara crossed one leg over the other, the crimson fabric of her dress shifting just enough to draw his attention. "You're already learning to sit straighter," she observed. "Good. But you still give away too much with your eyes." "My eyes?" he asked. "You look at what you want," she said, tilting her head. "And that tells people everything. Power is knowing how to see without being seen." Before Daniel could answer, Ms. Marlowe entered. She wore a tailored black suit over a silk blouse, her hair pinned up, a faint glimmer at her ears. She stopped just inside the doorway, surveying them. "I see you've started without me," she said. Her tone was neutral, but there was a current beneath it, one Daniel couldn't quite read. "Just a warm-up," Clara replied smoothly. Ms. Marlowe's gaze shifted to Daniel. "Stand up." He obeyed instantly. She circled him slowly, as if assessing his posture, his readiness. "You remembered to come on time," she said. "Good. That means we can move to something more advanced tonight." The lesson began with what she called controlled conversation. Daniel had to maintain eye contact with Clara while answering a series of questions Ms. Marlowe asked from across the room, questions that grew more personal, more challenging. Clara occasionally interrupted, leaning closer, adding her own questions that forced him to divide his focus. "You're doing better," Ms. Marlowe said at one point. "But you still hesitate. And hesitation is weakness." Clara leaned in until her shoulder nearly touched his. "Or maybe it's just caution," she countered. The back and forth between the two women was almost theatrical, as if they were debating not just his performance, but something deeper. Daniel felt like a rope being pulled from both ends and, strangely, he didn't mind. By the time they paused for wine, his pulse was high, his mind alert. During the break, Clara stood at the window, sipping her drink. Ms. Marlowe motioned for Daniel to follow her into the kitchen. She closed the door behind them. "Clara likes to push boundaries," she said quietly. "She wants to see if you'll break. I want to see if you'll bend." Daniel frowned. "Is there a difference?" Her lips curved slightly. "One is survival. The other is surrender. Tonight, you'll learn which one you're better at." Before he could ask what she meant, Clara's voice called from the other room, "We're waiting." The next exercise was about pace. Daniel had to move between them, literally responding to physical and verbal cues. Sometimes Ms. Marlowe would ask him to stand still and simply listen to her instructions. Sometimes Clara would draw him toward her with a glance or a softly spoken word. The challenge was that the cues often overlapped. Ms. Marlowe might tell him to stop while Clara urged him forward. The result was a constant pull between obedience and temptation. At one point, Clara reached out and took his wrist. "Come here," she said softly. "Stay," Ms. Marlowe commanded from behind him. The tension in the room spiked. Daniel froze, caught between them. "Interesting," Clara murmured, releasing him. "He follows the voice with more weight behind it?" "Not weight," Ms. Marlowe corrected. "Authority." Daniel's pulse was hammering. He realized he wasn't just learning about them, he was learning about himself. The night ended differently this time. Instead of sending him straight home, Ms. Marlowe walked him to the door while Clara lingered in the background. "You handled the pressure better," Ms. Marlowe said. "But you're still letting your emotions show too plainly. That's dangerous." "I'll work on it," he said. Her eyes softened, just slightly. "See that you do. Next week, things will be more layered." As he stepped into the cool night air, Daniel felt a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. The lessons were no longer just about posture or conversation, they were about reading people, responding under pressure, navigating a web of authority and attraction. And if he was honest with himself, he wanted to see how far they would go. The following Saturday brought a shift in atmosphere before the evening even began. Daniel arrived to find the townhouse dimly lit, with candles scattered across the living room and the faint sound of slow, rhythmic music. Clara sat in an armchair, wearing a fitted dark green dress, her hair loose. Ms. Marlowe stood behind her, one hand resting lightly on Clara's shoulder, a subtle display of connection Daniel hadn't seen before. "Tonight," Ms. Marlowe said, "we explore alignment. When two people share a focus, the third must learn where to fit." Daniel didn't know exactly what she meant, but he soon found out. The first part of the night was an exercise in observation. Clara and Ms. Marlowe engaged in a flowing, almost hypnotic dialogue, sometimes about him, sometimes about unrelated topics, and Daniel's task was to remain present, to respond only when directly addressed, and to adapt his tone to match the shifting energy in the room. At first it felt easy. Then the tempo changed. Clara would lean forward suddenly, firing a question at him in a teasing tone, only for Ms. Marlowe to interrupt with something firm and precise. It was a dance and he was expected to follow every step without stumbling. "You're learning to read the room," Clara said at one point. "Good. Most people don't even try." "But reading isn't enough," Ms. Marlowe added. "You must learn to influence it." By the end of the evening, Daniel felt both drained and strangely sharpened. As he was leaving, Clara walked him to the door instead of Ms. Marlowe. "She's testing you," Clara said quietly. "But I am too. And I'm not sure yet which one of us you'll end up belonging to." Before he could respond, she opened the door and gave him a small, knowing smile. "Think about that this week." Daniel walked into the night with a single thought looping in his mind: belonging isn't something you choose, it's something decided for you. and he wasn't sure if he was ready for either of them to decide. The week leading up to Saturday was unbearable. Daniel replayed Clara's words every night before falling asleep. "I'm not sure yet which one of us you'll end up belonging to." It wasn't just a question of loyalty, it was a challenge. And he knew both women wanted to see how he'd respond. By the time Saturday arrived, he felt like he was walking into a battlefield. When he knocked, Ms. Marlowe opened the door herself. She was dressed in deep burgundy tonight, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her smile was slow, measured. "Good. You're early," she said. "That tells me you've been thinking about what's coming." "What is coming?" Daniel asked. Her eyes glinted. "That's for us to decide." Inside, Clara was already seated on the sofa, legs crossed, wearing black silk that shimmered faintly in the low light. She was holding a notebook and pen, as if ready to take notes. Daniel glanced between them. "Are we doing another lesson?" "In a sense," Clara said. "Tonight's about direction." "Meaning?" he asked. Ms. Marlowe gestured for him to sit in the armchair opposite. "Meaning," she said, "that you'll have two leaders tonight and their instructions may not match. You'll need to learn which voice to follow, when to follow it, and when to blend the two." The first task seemed simple: stand in the center of the room, listen to both women, and follow instructions. But within minutes, Daniel realized they had no intention of making it easy. "Take a step toward me," Ms. Marlowe ordered. "Sit down," Clara countered instantly. Daniel froze, unsure which to obey. Clara tilted her head, studying him, while Ms. Marlowe's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a step toward Ms. Marlowe. Clara made a small note in her book. "Interesting." "Again," Ms. Marlowe said. For the next half hour, they put him through conflicting commands, some subtle, some direct. Sometimes the right answer was to choose, sometimes it was to wait. And slowly, Daniel began to see patterns. Clara's instructions often tested his impulse control, while Ms. Marlowe's tested his discipline. But the more he tried to please both, the more he felt caught in an invisible tug of war. At one point, Clara rose from the sofa and circled him slowly. "You're improving," she said, voice soft. "But you still hesitate when you think one of us might be disappointed." "That's human," Daniel replied. "Not in this game," Ms. Marlowe said firmly. "Hesitation is a crack in the wall. And once there's a crack, everything can fall apart." Clara smiled faintly. "Or, it can be the opening that lets something in." Their words hung in the air like smoke, and Daniel felt the strange pull of both the safety of Ms. Marlowe's precision, and the danger in Clara's ambiguity. The next exercise shifted from physical movement to verbal agility. Clara would ask him personal, even provocative, questions, while Ms. Marlowe instructed him on how to answer, limiting his words, controlling his tone, or sometimes giving him only a single phrase to repeat. Clara leaned in at one point, her voice low. "What's the first thing you notice about me when I walk into a room?" Ms. Marlowe's voice cut in immediately. "You have 3 words. No more." Daniel swallowed. "Confidence. Eyes." "That's 2, Clara noted, smiling. Leave him the third, Ms. Marlowe said. Daniel hesitated, then, danger. Clara's smile widened. When they finally allowed him to sit, his shoulders were tense, his mind buzzing. He had learned to listen not just to their words, but to the weight beneath them, and that weight was shifting. During a pause for drinks, Clara excused herself to the kitchen. Ms. Marlowe stepped closer to Daniel, speaking quietly. "You handled her well tonight," she said. "She's trying to see if she can pull you out of my frame. Don't let her." Daniel gave a small, nervous smile. "And if I already have?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Then you'd better hope you can find your way back." Before he could respond, Clara returned, holding a tray with fresh glasses. She set them down, her gaze flicking between them. "Ready for the last part?" she asked. The final lesson of the evening was unexpected. They placed a blindfold over Daniel's eyes. "You'll hear us move around you," Ms. Marlowe said. "Your task is to keep track of where we are at all times without sight." The first minutes were easy enough. Footsteps on the left, Clara. A shift of air behind him, Ms. Marlowe. But then they began moving faster, speaking from unexpected angles, switching positions without warning. At one point, Clara's breath brushed his right ear, while Ms. Marlowe's voice came from the left, and he realized they were deliberately trying to disorient him. It was dizzying, intense and strangely intimate. He could hear the faint rustle of clothing, the low rhythm of their breathing, the subtle differences in how each moved. When they finally removed the blindfold, he was breathing harder than he'd realized. "Not bad," Clara said. "Not perfect, but not bad." "You're learning to feel the room," Ms. Marlowe added. "That will matter later." As Daniel left that night, neither woman walked him to the door. Instead, they both stayed seated, watching him go. It wasn't until he reached the street that he realized tonight, they had started working together. Not as rivals, but as a team. And whatever they were planning, it was moving beyond lessons. It was becoming something else entirely. By now, Saturdays had become a ritual. The hours leading up to 8 o'clock were a strange mix of anticipation and dread. But this time, Daniel sensed something sharper in the air, as if the week had been leading to a decision point. When he arrived, Clara opened the door. She didn't smile. "Leave your jacket here," she said. "You won't need it." Daniel stepped inside. The townhouse was darker than usual, the curtains drawn, the only light coming from candles scattered through the room. Clara motioned toward the center of the living room, where a single chair sat. "Sit," she instructed. He obeyed. Ms. Marlowe entered from the hallway. She wore black tonight, almost entirely, the only color a silver chain at her throat. She didn't greet him, just moved to stand beside Clara, arms folded. "Tonight," she said, "you'll be tested." Daniel glanced between them. "Tested how?" "In loyalty," Clara answered. They explained the rules. They would each give him a set of instructions. Some would align. Some would directly contradict. His task was to follow them in real time, without question, without pause. By the end, Ms. Marlowe said, "We'll know where your instincts lead you. And we'll know, Clara added softly, "who you really belong to." It began innocently enough. "Ms. Marlowe, stand." "Clara, face me." Easy. But quickly, the commands began to clash. "Step forward," Clara said. "Don't move," Ms. Marlowe countered instantly. He froze. "Turn to your left," Clara ordered. "Look at me," Ms. Marlowe said sharply. It became a mental duel. Daniel caught between precision and seduction, authority and provocation. He could feel his pulse in his throat, the tension of being evaluated from two angles at once. Half an hour in, the tone shifted. The instructions weren't just about movement anymore, they dug deeper. "Tell her something you've never told me," Clara said. "Say nothing," Ms. Marlowe interrupted. Daniel's lips parted, then closed. Silence. Ms. Marlowe's gaze softened slightly. The pace quickened, the questions sharper. Clara would lean in close, her perfume heavy, whispering instructions meant to pull him toward her. Ms. Marlowe's voice would cut through the air like a clean blade, redirecting him back. At one point, Clara brushed her fingers across his hand. "Follow me," she said, stepping backward toward the hallway. "Stay exactly where you are," Ms. Marlowe ordered. The tension was almost unbearable. His breath came shallow. He stayed. Clara's smile at that moment wasn't disappointment, it was something colder. She made another note in her book. Finally, they called an end to the test. Daniel sat again, feeling wrung out. Ms. Marlowe poured him a glass of water, her movements unhurried. "You didn't break," she said. "He hesitated more than I expected," Clara replied. "That's part of the process," Ms. Marlowe countered. "A quick decision is useless if it's the wrong one." The atmosphere eased slightly. Clara took a seat across from him, studying him over the rim of her glass. "You know," she said slowly, "this could go further." Daniel looked between them. "Further how?" Ms. Marlowe's eyes met Clara's, and for the first time, Daniel saw an unspoken agreement pass between them. "Let's just say," Clara said, "we've been wondering what happens when you stop being a student, and start being part of the equation." The air felt heavier. Daniel realized this wasn't just about lessons anymore, it was about integration, about stepping into whatever space they were building together. Before he left that night, Ms. Marlowe walked him to the door alone. She rested a hand lightly on his shoulder. "You did well," she murmured. "But next time, Daniel, next time will be different." "How?" Her smile was the kind that didn't answer questions. "You'll see." The following week was restless. He couldn't stop thinking about that final exchange, about what further might mean. He wondered if Clara's cold smile during the test had been genuine or calculated. And he wondered, more than once, if he was being prepared for something neither woman had fully explained. When Saturday came, he felt less like he was arriving for a lesson and more like he was walking into an initiation. The air in Ms. Marlowe's townhouse felt different the moment Daniel stepped inside. The lighting was lower than usual, shadows stretching along the walls. Soft music played somewhere in the background, slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic. Clara stood by the window, wearing deep blue silk that caught the candlelight in subtle flashes. Ms. Marlowe was seated in the armchair, legs crossed, her gaze fixed on Daniel with unreadable calm. Neither greeted him. Instead, Ms. Marlowe simply said, "Close the door." He obeyed. The sound of the latch clicking seemed louder than it should have. "Tonight," she continued, "there are no warm UPS. No gradual build. We go straight to the test." Clara turned from the window, her expression sharper than usual. "And this time, there's no hiding in hesitation." Daniel glanced between them. "What kind of test?" "The last one," Ms. Marlowe said. "The one that decides whether you stay in our circle, or walk away." They explained nothing else. Instead, Clara motioned toward the center of the room, where two chairs faced each other. She sat in one, Ms. Marlowe in the other. Daniel was told to stand between them. "This is simple," Clara said. "We'll both speak to you at the same time. You can only respond to one of us in each exchange. Choose carefully. And remember," Ms. Marlowe added, "your choice is your loyalty." It began with ordinary prompts, questions about his week, about details from past lessons. But quickly, the tone sharpened. "Clara, tell me the moment you knew you trusted me." "Ms. Marlowe, tell me the moment you knew you feared me." Daniel's mind split down the middle. He chose Clara's question. "The next round. Ms. Marlowe, stand by me." "Clara, sit with me." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped toward Ms. Marlowe. The rhythm quickened. Each woman's instruction pulled in a different direction physically, emotionally. Some commands overlapped. Some clashed outright. Daniel felt as though he were being peeled open, layer by layer. And then the questions turned deeply personal. "Clara, if I asked you to follow me and never see her again, would you?" "Ms. Marlowe, if I told you to stay with me and forget her, could you?" His breath caught. The only sound in the room was the faint tick of the clock. "I." But the words didn't come. "Interesting," Clara murmured. The final phase came without warning. They stood now, both of them circling him slowly, their footsteps alternating like a metronome. Their voices overlapped, instructions spilling into his ears from opposite sides. "Look at me. Don't turn your head. Take my hand. Keep your arms at your sides. Follow. Stay." It was chaos, deliberate, orchestrated chaos. His pulse pounded. He realized they were no longer just testing obedience, but control under pressure so intense it bordered on overwhelming. And then, silence. He opened his eyes to find them standing before him, side by side. Ms. Marlowe spoke first. "This is it, Daniel. You choose now." Clara's gaze locked on his. "One of us. Not both. Not neither. One." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. His mind ran through every lesson, every moment, the discipline of Ms. Marlowe, the unpredictability of Clara. He thought of the times he had been pulled toward each of them, and the moments where they had worked in unison. His chest tightened. "No," he said finally. Both women tilted their heads slightly. "I don't choose," he continued. "I can't. You've been shaping me together from the start. That's the truth. And the truth is, I belong to both. A long pause. Then, unexpectedly, they exchanged a look and smiled. Ms. Marlowe stepped closer. He understands. Clara's eyes gleamed. Finally. Daniel blinked. So, this was a trap you could only escape, Ms. Marlowe said, by refusing to play by the rules. You've learned, Clara added, that sometimes the only way to win is to rewrite the game. The rest of the night unfolded differently. No commands. No tests. The three of them sat together, speaking openly about loyalty, about trust, about the power in resisting false choices. When Daniel left, the night air felt warmer, lighter. For the first time since stepping into their world, he didn't feel like a student. He felt like an equal. Ending note. Daniel's lessons hadn't ended, not really. But from that night forward, the balance had shifted. He was no longer just being shaped by them. He was part of whatever they were building, a partnership where loyalty wasn't about choosing sides, but standing in the space they created together. And somewhere deep down, he knew the real tests were still to come.